Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. I'm Matt Preem. Eric Scopel's on the show as always. And today we bring in our good friend from Penn State side of things, Tyler Donohue. Tyler from Lions 247, man. How's it going? How are things?
Yeah, we're good. Preseason's over around here. So we're excited to cover some Big Ten football, getting Beaver Stadium on Saturday. Whiteout energy all around campus right now. And so this is my ninth season covering this team. And matches up, I would say, with the lead up to just about any regular season matchup we've covered. People want to figure out who Penn State is, despite outscoring their first three opponents 132-17. I don't think we really know who Penn State is, but we'll have a good sense after these 60 minutes on Saturday night.
Yeah, Tyler, that's exactly where Oregon's at, by the way. And I'm deviating here from our show question, I guess, plan. But like, neither of these teams have played anybody with a pulse or anybody on their level. Certainly nobody, I guess, preparing itself for college football playoff positioning. What's kind of been your takeaway from these first few games? Like, are there things you can actually, like, I guess, are there things you actually feel like translate to Saturday that you feel really confident about? Or are you just kind of coming in like, boy, this is almost a season opener kind of situation?
Yeah, well, I mean, we do have 180 minutes of football, regardless of who they're playing against. We got to see some of the new pieces involved, some of the freshmen that have suddenly kind of stepped up. So I think there are some storylines that have popped up, but in terms of a general sense of how good the offense is going to be or how good the defense is going to be, no, that's kind of eluding us. I mean, you guys had a chance to at least watch your team go up against some Power 4 conference opponents. I know it's hard to categorize Oklahoma State like that this year because of the way they played. But Northwestern's in the Big Ten. Obviously, Oregon State's going to bring a lot of energy into that matchup. And here in Beaver Stadium, 3 consecutive Saturdays, we got Nevada, Florida International, and Villanova. No disrespect to the coaching staffs and the players involved on that other sideline, but Penn State is considered to be potentially its best version of itself since it went undefeated in 1994. So this was a lot more about us kind of poking holes in Penn State's performance versus celebrating lopsided victories. And if you bet on Penn State these 3 games, well, you lost money every week. They were favored by over 40 points every week, and they won by big deficits, but they didn't quite cover those lofty point spreads. They're 0-3 against the betting line. But ultimately, I think probably the way we come out of this is feeling good about how the defense is operated. There seemed to be some communication issues maybe early on in game 1. James Franklin actually said that was related to the home crowd noise. So it's something that they kind of ramped up the volume on the practice field, knowing they had to get to a whiteout game and be under control. They've got a new guy wearing the green dot on his helmet, and Amari Campbell, who transferred in from North Carolina during the summer. They've got a new guy giving the calls from the booth, and Jim Knowles, who obviously was a very splashy pickup after being the DC for Ohio State last season. And so I think we've liked the progression for Penn State on defense. We're going to see, obviously, a lot more narrowed rotational plans. We're not going to see all the depth that was on the field over the course of these games. But they only gave up 2 touchdowns through those first 3 games. One was with 25 seconds left in the game against Nevada. The other was as time expired against Villanova. A kid went up and made a one-handed stab and broke a bunch of bettors' hearts in the process. But at the end of the day, I think offensively is kind of where people have a little trepidation right now. Drew Aller and Nick Singleton, both as seniors, guys who have started more than 30 games in their career. They've been a bit inconsistent, and there's been a little bit of a lack of confidence on their end, where James Franklin has kind of publicly said, both guys overthinking of things a bit maybe early. He talked about Nick Singleton in particular this week and a couple weeks ago, and needing to let it rip and just kind of play with his instincts. And so I don't think that's really what Penn State fans want to hear, that these 2 guys that you think are kind of set it and forget it are maybe just dealing with a little early season stuff. I think what we don't understand is when these guys, get up to that tunnel in Beaver Stadium, the bright lights are on, the atmosphere is there, they've got Oregon across the field. Does that flick a switch? Does that change the demeanor and the performance? And regardless of who you're going up against, I think confidence is a huge thing. And so it's tricky. Were they playing with their food a little bit early on offense? Were they trying some new things? There was some thought that maybe offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki was attempting to really iron out some wrinkles over the course of those 3 games. So did we see the whole offensive attack? And so what will we see on Oregon against Oregon on that side of the ball? I think keep tabs on that, because if Penn State gets off to a slow start offensively, the crowd could start to get a little perturbed, because they're carrying, I think, a little bit of baggage from non-conference play where Penn State had some troubles finishing drives at times. Again, Drew Aller was under 60% completion in 2 of the 3 matchups. And Nick Singleton really has had some trouble with his vision, it seems, at times. And when he's on, he can go 80 yards, in a matter of moments. And so I think overall, again, the scores were what they were. Penn State's 3-0. But again, curtain really lifts on Saturday.
Tyler, James Franklin is a really good coach. 70% winning percentage, essentially. That's going to get you in the Hall of Fame. He's had like 5 top 10 finishes, but there's also the big game James mantra. He's 4-20 against top 10 teams. He's 1-5 against top 5 teams. You just kind of touched on it there a little bit, maybe just about the team in general. But what does this game and this opportunity present for James Franklin, the Penn State head coach? Because this is, like you said, maybe their best team in 30 years.
Yeah, James Franklin told us back in Las Vegas at Big Ten Media Days. He told us again at the start of preseason camp. He views this Penn State team, personnel-wise, from a coaching staff and roster perspective, as the best he's had. And he's in year 12 here with the program. You've got to go back to 2016, the last time they won the Big Ten championship. Last season was the first time getting back to the conference title game against Oregon, of course. But it has been a process of, winning 10 games and yet leaving much to be desired. Last year, they won 11 games for the first time under James Franklin during the regular season. And yet that one loss was against Ohio State in Beaver Stadium, a matchup in which they failed to score an offensive touchdown. And it's really been an issue where when Michigan was on its roll and competing for championships under Harbaugh, Penn State was not able to beat them. They played them close most of the time, but they weren't able to beat them. Ohio State, for the last 8 years, has had the win streak over Penn State. They've played on an annual basis. I think most people would argue that no team has played outside of Michigan. No team has played Ohio State to more contentious matchups, games that are hanging in the balance down the stretch in the fourth quarter. And yet, for one reason or another, Penn State hasn't gotten to the finish line with a victory. You've got to go back to that 2018 loss in Beaver Stadium. James Franklin gave this mantra to us in the media room about going from great to elite. And when you put that out there and you're talking about needing to beat a team like Ohio State to take that step forward, that's kind of been a bit of a cloud over him and his time here at Penn State. And so as they've strung together, New Year's Six bowls and finally a college football playoff appearance last year, a lot of people are waiting for signature victories. It was a beautiful thing for Penn State fans to see them win multiple playoff games, but they came against SMU, a team that had to come up and play in 20-degree weather and just didn't look like they were ready for the moment. And then they played Boise State, which is a great story, a great running back there. But it's not a pedigree program. And when they did go up against Notre Dame in South Florida with a chance to go to the national championship game, offensively, they really fell flat. And they lost a close game. And there was just a matter of moments that made the difference in that matchup. And so this is the first chance since that Notre Dame game where James Franklin has the national spotlight on this team. And you want to see what they can do with it. If they were to lose this game, I think what I probably worry about is not so much the fans being upset, but internally, how does the locker room feel about itself? Because a lot of these guys have been around 5-6 years that are key players for this team. They've never beaten Ohio State. They haven't beaten Michigan in a big game. They lost to Notre Dame in the bright lights. They lost to Oregon in a very tight, kind of fun back and forth game, trying to make that comeback last year in Indianapolis. And so I worry a little bit about this team without picking up that victory early, where their head's going to be at November 1st, going to Columbus, Ohio. Right. And so to me, this is a key stepping stone. I think we have to be careful knowing that you can lose a game in September and be okay and get back to the Big Ten championship game. These two teams could meet again in December. So I don't want to say this is like the make or break moment for James Franklin. But to me, in this year, the way that the players and James have talked, with their chest out and talking about their expectations, winning a national championship, they've got to look the part this week, or rightly so. There's going to be questions. And I'll be honest with you, because of what he said about the coaching staff, because of what he said about the roster, and because this team is really relatively healthy right now, there's just not a lot of excuses on the table that Penn State will be able to point to and say, well, this is why we lost. Give us another chance. It's going to be they straight up went head to head with another very talented team in their home stadium with one of the best environments you'll find in sports, and it wasn't enough. And that's going to leave people scratching their heads and wondering if James Franklin can ever break through. And I just wonder if that carries over a little bit within the football facilities as they move forward in this season. So I think it is pretty important from a psychological perspective, and obviously just trying to get to 4-0 and assert yourself as one of the top teams in college football and send Oregon back with a loss.
Yeah, psychological barriers, I think, get overlooked in sports sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and you just wonder what happens if that doesn't go that way. And I'm actually curious, kind of in the context of some of what you were saying there, just of like what's been the fan or even within the program discussion of last year's Big Ten championship game in this lead up, and kind of like what has James or some of the players said about kind of what they learned and can take away from that experience?
I thought something interesting that we heard this week from James Franklin, actually, which is kind of a fresh note here, is he said that he feels like they maybe have more in their tool bag defensively than what they brought to the Big Ten championship game last year. Whether you want to view that as kind of a zinger in the direction of Tom Allen down at Clemson as their defensive coordinator now, or more of a tip of the cap toward Jim Knowles, who obviously is considered quite the brilliant mind on defense. I'm not sure which is which, but ultimately I think there's a different level of confidence in what they can do coverage-wise, what they're allowing their defensive linemen to do. I think they're playing a bit more freely up front. They do have an outstanding secondary here at Penn State, but we haven't really seen them tested so far through these 3 matchups. There's been decent quarterback play, but we haven't seen a star quarterback. We haven't seen a high-level blue-chip type that you're going to see across the field in Dante Moore. And so I think that's a key thing when you give up 45 points and you're playing from behind. I don't remember what the points were for Oregon at halftime, but I think they were at like 28 or 30 points by halftime last year. And that was a defense that just didn't have that experience through 12 regular season games. So I think right now there's cautious optimism about the defense, knowing that they, again, haven't faced wide receiver, quarterback combo, backfield like this thus far in 2025. And I think there also is, when people talk about Drew Aller and his ceiling and who he can be when he's playing his best, a lot of people look at the second half of that Oregon matchup. You know, he took some chances. He threw a late interception, but he took chances. And we don't really see him take chances. His body of work as a 3-year starter has been a guy who really doesn't take a lot of deep shots. He kind of plays within his control. It felt like in that second half against Oregon, he actually was rising all the boats around him. He was like playing that way at quarterback. And, that would be big to see him come out and have that kind of a performance early on against Oregon and look that part. But I think really what is some confidence right now for Penn State's angle is maybe the ability to run the ball against this Oregon team. I know maybe that's a question that Ducks fans have about their defense coming into this matchup against Penn State. I certainly know that Penn State found something with its rush attack last postseason. It carried all the way through, even against Notre Dame. Nick Singleton had 3 rushing touchdowns. We saw Katron Allen run crazy against Oregon last year, and he has sustained that play. He is at a very high level right now as a senior running back. I would certainly make the case that he is the better of these 2 running backs right now as a rusher. The offensive line has been highly lauded all offseason. Again, people saying maybe the best offensive line since 1994. Some baby steps were necessary, I think, during non-conference play. They brought a guy back from a long-term injury. They moved a lot of pieces. They got depth guys involved. They played their best football in game 3 going into the bye week. I still think that's a very strong unit. So to me, the combination of the running back, again, even with not knowing where Nick Singleton is right now in terms of going full throttle psychologically, I think that there's a sense here in Happy Valley that if they can establish the run, they're going to do Drew Aller a lot of favors, and they could potentially, wear down Oregon and keep their high explosive offense off the field. Because I know speaking today with Zakee Wheatley, starting safety here, and Denai Dennis Sutton, the standout defensive end here. They talk about explosivity. They talk about the tempo with Oregon. They have a lot of respect. To me, though, it's going to be about Penn State's offense holding up its end of the bargain. And I think there is a quiet confidence here that they can run the football against the Ducks, and I would expect them to feel out that situation in the first quarter.
At Oregon, the first 4 games of the year, it's very similar to your comments about trying to find some nitpicks of what's been wrong with blowout victories. And I think for Oregon, some of that has been their rush defense, whether that's maybe some inflated stats of Northwestern starters going against 4-string defenders against Oregon and ripping off 2 75-yard scores, or legitimate stuff like it against Oregon State, where the Beavers had a really long sustained drive in the first quarter. That's been maybe one glaring concern of you don't really quite know where Oregon's at going into Penn State, and you'll learn eventually. What are those things for Penn State? What are the concerns? You mentioned trying to find some. what are those concerns that you don't really know if they are legitimate or if it's just, hey, they just were playing an inferior opponent and you just chalk it up to that?
Yeah, I'll go back. I mean, if Nick Singleton is preseason All-American Nick Singleton, then this offense complexion changes. But if Nick Singleton is the guy we saw through the first 3 weeks where it was a bit of a struggle for him, they really seemed to try to get him right against Villanova. He had 8 carries on the first drive after having 8 carries in all of game 1. Still didn't look all that great. I mean, he looked kind of average to above average when you're expecting elite level play from a senior who's a former Big Ten freshman of the year and has a lot of accolades under his belt. So to me, probably a big question people are looking at is what would you get from Nick Singleton in this game? Because he's such a threat as a speed presence in the backfield and as a receiver, but you want to make sure he's on track. And I think some people are wondering, is it time to maybe lean toward Kaytron Allen? These guys have been attached at the hip since their freshman year. They're right now on pace to finish number 1 and number 2 in school history for rushing yards, yet we've never really gotten a chance to see one or the other go for 25, 30 carries in a big setting because it has been that shared role. Is Nick Singleton getting into halftime and it's more of the same from non-conference play, or is Nick Singleton getting to halftime on Saturday night and you've got a spark from him? Because I think once you get into that locker room, discussion might need to be had. Do we lean on Kaytron Allen as a runner? We'll get to that one once that time comes. And I think ultimately we're all curious to see what the passing game with Drew Aller and his new receivers will look like against a team like Oregon. There's been flashes from all 3 of those transfer pickups: Trevor Pena out of Syracuse, Kyron Hudson out of USC, and Devontae Ross from Troy. They've all had their moments in the first few games. Pena's a guy they're getting involved as a rusher as well, but really steady out of the slot, caught a touchdown in the last matchup. Kyron Hudson was the kind of the star receiver in game 1, and he's somebody who's been really lauded for his contested catch ability. You saw a bit of that at USC. He had a highlight reel catch against LSU last year. But Devontae Ross, to me, is kind of the wild card here because he was banged up in the summer, ended up forecasted to miss the first 3 matchups and making his season debut against Oregon. Instead, he got back on the field and was able to play all 3 of these games. And by the end of the process, he had a 42-yard touchdown reception from Drew Aller, and he had 3 punt returns of 10-plus yards. They had, as a team collectively in 16 games last year, 3 punt returns of 10-plus yards. So he has been a game changer. He was top 20 last year nationally in yards per game at Troy. And now you got a chance to see him play against Big Ten competition. You get a chance to see Trevor Pena, who was Syracuse's leading receiver in the ACC last year, get a chance to go up against a team like Oregon. And same deal for Kyron Hudson, who's taking on a larger role than he had at USC. And so ultimately we want to see, does it look like this is a progression that the receiver room has upgraded? And I think that's really going to show through on Oregon, whether or not this receiver room is really ready to help lead this attack. Because if you guys recall, last year, not a single catch from the receiver group against Notre Dame in a national semifinal game. The 2 guys that were leading the way at the position are on different campuses now. It was basically a reset in that room. And so I think those 3 receivers, early and often, you want to see what the connection looks like with Drew Aller. How are they able to kind of challenge Oregon downfield? And I'll throw one more name your way for the pass attack. He's probably been the most steady presence of late. Luke Reynolds, sophomore tight end, former number 1 tight end recruit for us at 24/7 Sports in the 2024 class. Tyler Warren told me this spring he thinks that Luke Reynolds could end up being the best tight end ever play at Penn State, and that's coming from the best tight end ever play at Penn State. So keep an eye on Luke Reynolds as well. If things aren't going well for the receivers or Drew Aller's having trouble and they're not getting separation, you could start to see him maybe force feed the ball to Luke Reynolds. I don't think you want to see 15 targets to one guy in this game. You want to see the distribution of wealth. And I think we'll get a chance to really read what this receiver room upgrade looks like as we get through Oregon.
The Nittany Lions, let's go defense for a second here. You guys have had an incredible, I guess, just track record with edge talent, whether it be Micah Parsons, Abdul Carter last year, some numerous guys in between, guys going back to the 90s too. Is denied Dennis Sutton kind of the next one? Like what's the takeaway been? Because, a year ago, I know I was looking at it, super productive as well. I think like 8.5 sacks, 13.5 tackles for loss, something like that. This year he's producing like he is that kind of alpha. Talk about what the development has been there and kind of how he's been able to thrive early on.
Yeah, he is one of the biggest recruiting wins for James Franklin. We knew that back in high school coming out of Maryland, that they beat out Alabama and Georgia, very contentious recruitment, got him to campus. So we knew that was a big one then. And now at the end of his career now as a senior, I think you're really seeing that validated. Going back to last postseason when everybody had their eyes on number 11, watching Abdul Carter, wondering if he'd be the number 1 overall pick in the draft, you can make a case that Denai Dennis Sutton was their best defender during the postseason. And in the playoffs particularly, he was a tackle for loss machine. He was wreaking havoc against Notre Dame. He had an incredibly acrobatic interception while dropping back into coverage against Notre Dame as well. So getting it done in the backfield and at the second level. And thus far, he has been the tone setter for this defense. I mean, it's not surprising to see him bullying those teams we saw in the trenches, but just his body language. There's times like before third down plays where he'll just extend his arms wide, look to the sky, and like let out a howl. And then he'll get in his 3-point stance. I mean, he's kind of a madman. He's just wired that way. I think he's on path to be their next first-round pick at this position. But I heard from him today, and he understands, the biggest test now await. He feels really strongly about his hot start. He said it was very important to him to kind of build that foundation early in non-conference action. And so, again, another guy that we'll learn more about on Saturday, but he's one of those Penn State standouts that I feel really good about. This is who he is right now. And I think he's going to press for All-American status. And he's just built a bit differently than Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter has the edge in quickness, and he's a bit smaller, compact dude. Remember, he was All-American freshman linebacker here at Penn State before he became a defensive end. I mean, Denai is like 265 pounds, 6'5". You stand next to him, though, he feels like he's 6'8". He just has this presence. And so he's going to need to be at the top of his game. And I think if he is able to do damage off the edge, like we have continued to see, this could be a situation that Dante Moore maybe hasn't faced yet in his college football career, where he's got this guy coming at him. And Penn State is going to look to work him directly off Zane Durant, who also got a lot of preseason All-American buzz at defensive tackle, a smaller, compact defensive tackle with incredible quickness. And so look for those two to be lined up next to each other quite a bit on Saturday. But yeah, Denai Dennis Sutton has looked the part thus far, and he's somebody who always impressed. But I think now that he's getting his own opportunity to kind of be one of the figureheads of this defense, it's been really impressive to see.
You mentioned those comments and that from James Franklin about the tool belt. And I watched the press conference, and that was something of note to me, especially when it was man-to-man against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game last year. Where is this unit improved? What are the names to know? Obviously, we know of Wheatley, we know of Mack, Dixon, Washington. Those are all guys that are highly productive. But where is this team improved? And is it maybe Jim Knowles, the new defensive coordinator, maybe just deploying these guys differently that the strengths, the confidence is coming from? Or what's different with this secondary compared to last year's, I guess, just execution?
Yeah, so last year you saw Penn State go with 5 defensive backs pretty frequently. Now that's pretty much where they live. They live in a 5 defensive back defense, and the 5th defensive back in the slot coverage has been Zion Tracy, who played a bunch last year. He filled that role last year and impressed. So you're going to see a ton of defensive backs involved. They go deep at cornerback. They go 4 deep at safety. You mentioned King Mack, and he's not necessarily a guy that we know a lot about quite yet, but he started his first ever college game last Saturday. He went to Alabama as a sophomore and then came back to Penn State as a junior. Very rare to see that. Former top 100 recruit out of South Florida. And he's been fantastic. I mean, he is considered one of the fastest players in college football. Denai Dennis Sutton told me today that no one's as explosive as King Mack on this team. He's probably dished out the hardest hit of the season so far. He's had some key pass breakups, and he had like a 75-yard kickoff return during non-conference play as well. So I think him stepping up at safety alongside Zakee Wheatley has been big. Dejan Lane is a sophomore and who's actually led all safeties in snaps the last couple of weeks, despite not starting. He was kind of waiting in the wings last year as a freshman. So you'll see a lot of him involved as well. I think cornerback is where we're all going to be pretty focused in on this week, because these guys just haven't been targeted. I think A.J. Harris, according to Pro Football Focus, has been targeted once on the season. He's somebody who was getting some, cornerback one buzz around him, looking toward the 2026 NFL draft, I should say. Former 5-star, transferred in from Georgia last year, started every game. And we want to see what it looks like when he's going man-to-man with someone like Jacorian Moore and has a chance to be tested and has a chance to make plays, or maybe has a chance to get exposed. You never know with that cornerback position because you're on an island. And I think opposite of him, Aldavian Collins has really impressed a lot of people. He's another transfer pickup from a few years ago out of Mississippi State, has kind of waited his turn. always brings a lot of energy and kind of violence to the cornerback position, but he's actually seeing extended run right now. And there's another name that's kind of on the rise there at cornerback, Darius Dixon. I'm pretty sure Oregon recruiting followers would probably know that name because he was at Mater Dei in California, one of the top defenders out of the state of California in the last class. He's gone 20, 25 plus snaps every single week. He's dished out some hard hits. And I'm telling you, they're going to go 4 or 5 deep at cornerback. They're going to go 4 deep at safety. And you're going to see 5 of these guys in the field. I would say that with the 2 linebackers set up, they're getting high play out of those 2 linebackers. Right now, it's largely been Amari Campbell, who I mentioned came up from North Carolina. He was like the defensive captain for a bad defense last year with the Tar Heels. He has looked good with being surrounded by better talent and better coaching. Coming off his best game, 3 tackles for loss, and then Tony Rojas next to him. These 2 guys have a history playing, in the prospect scene in Virginia. They were already close before they got here together at Penn State, but they've been playing off each other very well. Rojas had a couple sacks in the last game. He's a guy that last year, you may remember, kind of got lost in the shuffle at times, but he was banged up. He was dealing with the shoulder injury for much of his sophomore year as a first-time starter. It was something that wasn't really discussed publicly a bunch, but he had that worked on. He missed spring ball, recovering, and he's looked like a different player right now as a junior. So I think that tandem of linebackers with Campbell and with Rojas, you're going to see some Dom DeLuca in there as well. And those 5 defensive backs, if those guys can do their job and let the denied Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant combo and the other defensive linemen get after the backfield a bit, I think that's a really good recipe for Penn State. Whereas last year, it just didn't seem like they had the confidence to mix up their coverage, and whether that was just on Tom Allen's end or whether that was on a personnel end. But right now, I think we're going to see more exotic coverage looks from Jim Knowles. And let's face it, Jim Knowles got himself punched in the face out in Oregon last year. And it was one of the low points for him as a defensive coordinator. Obviously, he got another shot later on. It went in a very different direction out in the Rose Bowl. But speaking with him last week, there's a sense that he is taking this matchup perhaps a little bit more personally, considering that history against Oregon.
Looking at this game, I'm curious from just your guys' media side perspective, maybe how Penn State's approaching this, and certainly the fan base, because I compare this game very similar to, at least on our end, from what Ohio State coming to Eugene last year was. I mean, or the pregame production that Autzen Stadium put into, from the rollout, was something we'd never seen before. The environment was as impressive as we've ever seen Autzen Stadium before, and it's got an insane reputation. And then the build up for it was just through the roof from the fan base. You can even tell the administration was fired up for that game. What are you getting from a sense from the Penn State side of things with Oregon coming to town? Obviously, Penn State's played in big games, and Ohio State, Penn State is certainly has more history than Oregon coming to Penn State's going to have. But what's just kind of the buildup of these 2 top 6 teams in the country playing one another in a game that has been talked about basically for 9 months because we've had the schedule for a while?
I think it's pretty much just let's do this. Showtime. Turn on the lights and let's see what everyone's about. Ready or not, you've had all this time to tune up. You've had these games to work through. Show what the hand you're holding. What do you got this season? And I think ultimately this will be the best whiteout atmosphere that we've seen since 2021. There's never a bad whiteout atmosphere, but the last few years, I think it was Illinois last year for a home game. That was really before Illinois started to take off and become more of a ranked team. And then a couple years ago was Minnesota for the whiteout game. The issue has been the big noon kickoff, and that's where you play Ohio State, and that's where you play Michigan lately. And they don't want to put the whiteout at noon. They want it under the lights. And although they did it during the day against SMU, and actually last year they had a couple during the regular season. They had whiteout energy game against Illinois, I should say, and they had their regularly scheduled whiteout against Washington, which seemed cool with it earlier because it was the defending national runner-up, but we know Washington wasn't that team last year. So 2021 was coming off of COVID, everyone getting the party back, and it was Auburn coming to town. So a cool SEC brand. So I think this is going to be at a different level than those we've seen in recent years. You've got ESPN's College Game Day setting up shop in the middle of campus later this week. That's happened before. And this is a storied situation, the whiteout for Penn State. I'm an outsider. I'm not a Penn State alum, unlike many of my media colleagues, but I quickly learned that it's just a separating thing for this program. They get recruits in the stadium. These guys, when they're 22, they tell you, yeah, when I was 17, that's how Penn State, sealed the deal, was my whiteout experience. And so I think ultimately you look back at some of the moments in history. It's 2017, Saquon Barkley's first touch of the game against Michigan. He goes 75 yards for a touchdown. I thought the press box was going to collapse. I mean, the stadium was just rocking. 2019, before the first play of the game for Michigan, their quarterback Shea Patterson has to call a timeout because he can't communicate with his teammates. And so that's what you're going to see initially. You're going to see a raucous environment. I mean, this is going to be, I think, as loud as Oregon has encountered, whether it's at their home stadium or a visiting stadium. I think this is an Oregon program that's up for the moment. They're not a team that I'm going to say is going to be kind of impacted by that. But if it's hard to hear, it's hard to hear, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. And so I think that we'll learn a little bit about where Penn State can take things, because it's up to the team to keep the crowd going. If Penn State comes out, starts a little slow offensively, maybe those decibels drop a bit. But if they come out, like I said, and force an early timeout because of the noise, or they're able to get a big defensive play, or a guy like Nick Singleton rips off a big play, you're going to see an engaged crowd from start to finish. And it's going to be 110,000 people in that stadium despite the renovations. And James Franklin, really called for it yesterday. He said he wants this to be an event unlike any that has been seen. And he talked about he wants to ensure that this is the most intimidating environment, not just in college football, but across sports. And he wants that to be clearly obvious for people who are tuning into this game. And I know he wants it to be clearly obvious for Oregon as they try to work through this game. So I'll tell you what, I'm sorry we're not going to have you in the press box, because it's going to be rocking and rolling, and let's hope it stays upright during the process. But I think it is going to be a great atmosphere, one that's worthy of a matchup like this. And I don't know how Oregon managed to slip out of the top 5 considering what they did through 4 weeks. I thought it would be a top 5 matchup, but top 6 matchup still works quite well. And I think these are two teams that should have every motivation to go out and look the part of a national championship contender on Saturday.
All right, last thing for you, Tyler. Just give me a player on both sides of the ball that is really key. Like, you really want to see something from each of these players to ensure the Nittany Lions get a win.
Sure. Why don't we go with a freshman on defense, Chaz Coleman? He's a guy that I think when he got to campus in June, we figured, okay, he might play a little bit here and there, take a red shirt. He'll be a fun story in 2026. Instead, he was one of their most impactful, disruptive defensive players through non-conference play. He was over 20 snaps a game. They told us a while ago he's going to burn his red shirt. He's a guy that Ohio State pushed really hard to keep in their home state last year at the end of the cycle. Penn State was in earlier on him, was able to bring him to campus, but he didn't focus in on defensive end until his senior year of high school. He was playing quarterback, wide receiver. Right now, he looks like that next guy. You told me about kind of the lineage of pass rushers, edge rushers. After Denida and Sutton, right now you think it's going to be Chaz Coleman. But is he ready for the moment? Is he going to have the confidence to go at Oregon? You're not going to see him in the starting lineup, but you're going to see him getting a lot of work, especially on pass down situations. And so I'm keeping an eye on him, because thus far he's done some special things. He had a strip sack that he almost took back for a touchdown in game 2. And it was just a lot of coordination and self-awareness to force the fumble, find it. And when he gets the ball, he still looks like a wide receiver or a quarterback. I mean, he is a very athletic guy, long guy, 6'4", 250 pounds. So keep an eye on him off the edge. And offensively, I think I'll probably go with Anthony Donko, who's a right guard for Penn State. He was a starting right tackle for the first 10 games last season, ended up suffering an injury late, missed the whole postseason, missed all of spring ball. And now he came back, and the guy who replaced him at right tackle last year, Nolan Rucci, did such a good job late year that he ended up holding on to the jobs. But they wanted Donko involved. I think thus far he hasn't looked as impactful. He hasn't looked as impressive at the guard spot, which was actually his initial position with Penn State before he kicked out the right tackle last year. So to me, the right side of the line has been a bit underwhelming this year. Him and Rucci are playing alongside each other for the first time. They were going toe-to-toe and competing for that job all of last year. And so were they able to work out some of those kinks through 3 matchups? Is he ready to look like that aggressive presence? And he was a Sean Alexander Freshman of the Year candidate last year on the offensive line. So there was some attention on this guy. So to me, he is a key to this offensive line taking the next step from where they were above average in non-conference play, but they have elite expectations. So I think Anthony Donko at right guard and really that right guard, right tackle combination with Nolan Rucci, that could be an X factor going into this game in terms of not just running the football, but protecting Drew Aller.
Well, Tyler, thanks for your insight into this game. It's going to be an exciting one. Eric and I are extremely jealous to not be there. It's going to be a raucous environment, and hope you guys enjoy the game. Next time you hear from us on the podcast, it will be on Thursday for our preview show, and then we'll have a post-game show as we always do. But until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.